So once again, welcome to the Pilot Industry and Career Outlook webinar. To get things started real quick, I just want to talk a little bit about this GoToWebinar platform that we're using. If you are on a computer, you'll have access to everything, so you should be able to see the presentation that we have going, and you should be able to see us in the frame. Additionally, if you have if you're on like an iPad or some other kind of tablet, you should be able to see both as well. If you're on a smartphone, you will have to slide from one side to the other in order to be able to see either us or to be able to see the presentation piece. And so with that kind of all squared away, I want to also identify that at the end of this whole webinar, we're going to do kind of a live question and answer section. So on your device, whatever you're on, there will be a questions section. Feel free, you can populate whatever questions you have as we go through this presentation. And then at the end, we can go ahead and field any of those questions that you might have. So that being said, I think we'll get right into it. So we can get started kind of with an overview. Good. So we're going to talk a little bit about who we are first. And then we'll talk a little bit about who Flight Path Vectors is, and then we're going to get into some of the questions that a lot of you have already asked as you registered for this event. We're referring to those as the guiding questions, and at the very end, we'll leave the last 10 minutes or so for this Q&A portion from any questions you have throughout the presentation. Okay, so let's get started with a little bit about us. I'll get started with myself. My name is Eric Noel. I work here for AeroGuard Flight Training Center. So we are a flight academy based here in Phoenix, Arizona, and we have campuses across the nation in Florida and Texas and also California. And we do professional-based ab initio or initial flight training for students. So that's a little bit about us. And then we can also talk a little bit about these three gentlemen. Can you move this over to the next couple past us? Good. So immediately to my right is Mr. Al Timpower. He's currently first officer at Southwest Airlines. And really, I think what you're going to find is kind of a general theme amongst all three of these gentlemen from Flight Path Vectors is that they're a lot more than just pilots. And I think that's really the value add that they're going to bring to this particular webinar. So Al has had a lot of experience in the hiring process at airlines, in dealing with professional standards at the airlines, and also in pilot mentoring and the pilot groups themselves, like almost like a pilot representative for the pilot group at the airline. Similarly, Phil Green is next on the list. Part of this still over on the screen, but he's here. And Phil, very similarly, is a first officer at Southwest Airlines as well. Once again, extensive background in mentoring pilots and in the hiring process as well in his previous experience. Last on the far end, certainly not least, is Mike Orsinger. He's currently a captain at SkyWest Airlines, and once again, extensive background in pilot mentoring. He's on the hiring team there, and has also done a lot of work in their professional standards program as well. And I think, once again, just to kind of highlight the value that these gentlemen bring is really just in all of the other things that they do that is not just flying, right? There are a lot of airline pilots, but I think these guys have a different kind of perspective on the industry because of the experience that they've had at the airlines they've worked for. So that being said, we can move on, and I'm going to have Al speak a little bit to who Flight Path Vectors is and what they're all about.
Thank you, Eric. Again, my name is Al Timpower. I'm one of the members of Flight Path Vectors. I appreciate you all joining us today. I appreciate the questions you have. We're trying to do our very best to answer those questions as best we can. Beyond that, if you want to converse with us or contact us, there'll be that capacity as well. What we do at Flight Path Vectors is the three of us have seen a need in the industry coming for the quote-unquote soft skills. Soft skills meaning things outside of actually manipulating the flight controls of the aircraft. And we've seen a lot of difficulties in the airline industry. And typically, pilots are not really taught that. So we've taken it upon ourselves to actually go out and mentor and help pilots be more successful in their careers. You can see in front of you our mission statement, our goals and objectives, but our main goal is investing in you. That is our goal. The three of us are very passionate about it. We've been doing it for many, many, many years. We've seen many capacities, not just with pilots, but with the airlines, the airline business models, contracts, and whatever else. And in that respect, we can guide and help pilots make informed, timely decisions so that you're actually best prepared to make that move and have a great career. Bill, you want to add anything?
Yeah, and just to add to that, like what Al said, to piggyback off of what he mentioned, is our main focus is to invest in you so you can make the best decision based off of the information, extensive information and experience that we've gathered over the years, so you can find the right path of training for yourself, so you can find maybe a good fit as far as training and then moving on to an airline, whether it be a regional or a major airline, whatever your goals are, or whether it be corporate or cargo. With our experience and some of the networks we've created, we can certainly find information for you so you can make a well-informed, well-educated decision along your path.
Yeah, I think you guys hit it all. I would just say that it, for me, became clear that there's a large gap in terms of access and information for folks who are understanding, hey, I've always wanted to be this airline pilot, have a career as an aviator, but I'm not sure how to go about the process. And it began for me years ago when I came to the industry, seeing that need, and it's as relevant and as recent as my most recent trip a couple of days ago. The individual I was flying with had the same circumstance, the same story, just didn't know where to go to get information. Was super excited that they ended up where they were, but they referred to it as sort of being very coincidental, and they were very thankful. That's really speaks to, I think, what it is that we want to provide. There's a huge need there that I experience all of the time, and that's really, I think, what we're after.
Good. I think I've answered. We'll move forward to some questions.
Yeah, so what we've done is compiled of all of the questions that were submitted as you guys were registering for this event, and kind of formed them into kind of general groups. There was a lot of questions that were pretty similar, right? I think that there's a lot of crossover amongst those questions, and so we kind of just refined it down into a general sequence of pieces here. So we're going to get started with the first one here. We can go to the next slide.
I'd like to add, if you see these questions and you have a question that stems from any of the answers you got, please write it down, and when it comes to the live question, make sure if you need to reference that question, just so we can redirect our gears, we can better understand and answer those questions.
And also piggyback off that, if we don't get to the question during the live part of this webinar, feel free to send a question to us via Instagram or Facebook, Flight Path Vectors, or email us, flightpathvectors@gmail.com. So certainly reach out to us that way, and if we don't get to your specific question, we can find you there and get with you there.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So a lot of the questions sort of stem around something to do with the state of the industry now, and is this what's going on in the industry, and is it really a safe industry to be in? And so to kind of kick that off, I think we'll start a little bit talking about job availability. And so I think this very first piece talks a little bit about, I think, what everybody sees now in the news. So maybe you guys can kick things off a little bit and
Absolutely. So we want to be completely candid and very real with what's the numbers at. Obviously, what's happening is unprecedented. What's happening is affecting a lot of people in the airline industry, specifically pilots. But this is not a cycle that's unknown to the aviation industry. There has been the ups and downs. This has been a down that's unforecasted, and it's on there. Airlines do plan for this. There are plans for instances like this. But we're going to kind of paint a picture exactly what's happened, where we're at today, and what we can expect in the very near future. With that moving forward, if you can look on your screen, you'll see a job availability. I'm sure everyone's been aware that the word furlough has been thrown out there. Today, there's been some furlough warning letters. That's the intent to furlough at numerous airlines. And you can see by that graph, there's a significant portion represented in the airline industry. So these are potential furloughs that we're looking at after October 1st. So, you know, a question was put out to us about what airline is a good airline to go to. And I think Phil.
Yeah, look at this chart. That was one of the things I wanted to touch on. This chart tells us obviously where the furloughs gone out to, what airlines have got furloughs, but also I think it highlights by what names you do not see on this chart in particular, maybe what airline could be attractive to you.
Yeah, stability.
Potentially, the stability of the airline. And
yeah, I mean, so take a look at who's not on there. It'd be a good starting point if you're looking for, I want stability, longevity, good business model, if you will. So it's a good thing. The other thing I want you to point out to you is really pay attention to the numbers. We're going to present a lot of numbers out there as far as how many pilots are moving and shifting. So there's just some fine print there. Take a look at those numbers. Write them down if you want to, because it's going to be definitely applicable. So.
Good. So, and I think kind of to ultimately think about off of that, it's not just about what we see in news cycles right now, but let's look at sort of the track record of the industry. So we can move on to the next bit of data here. And I think what we're going to see is a kind of a different perspective. There are bumps in the road, as Alan talked about before, right? We've had other sort of crises that have occurred. But I think that what this speaks to is a little bit more about how the industry has trended basically since its inception 50 years ago, right?
Absolutely, since deregulation, yeah. So the bumps in the roads, you know, the highs and lows of the airlines, most notably recently, we can look back on as SARS, the 2008 economic downturn, and obviously 9/11. All unprecedented things that moved forward, caught the airline industry by come on their heels, and subsequent demand went down. But the one thing that's really telling is how the airline industry actually reacted to it, what happened, and what were the recovery efforts and the timelines associated with each. So again, this is not a new phenomenon. It's not as catastrophic where everything's going to stop on a dime. But there is a actual predictive model we can use to see where we're at and where we can move forward to expect. So,
yeah, for sure. And this is worldwide specifically, right? So we also can speak a little bit to how the airlines here specifically in the United States have recovered. That's the next data point here that we'll see in the presentation. And what I think this is going to reference is less about passenger miles that are available. Go ahead. And more about actual profit and loss of all of those airlines combined.
So just looking at the airlines are in the business of making money. It's a financial need that actually drives the airlines. When they're profitable, times are good. They'll expand, they move things, and what that means for pilots is there's lots of jobs. So if we look at this graph, it's very telling, 2001 and after, 9/11. Yes, that was a big hit to the country and the trust that the flying public had in the airlines and security and whatnot, so there was a definite hit. But you can see at 2006, the recovery level was robust. The airlines started hiring new markets, new travel. The confidence in the market, in the airline industry was high, and the recovery was fairly brisk. 2008 happened, and you see 2009 and 2010. Again, it was a very, very, very strong return for travel and profitability for the airlines. And again, we want that profitability because that means jobs for pilots.
Now, you were talking earlier, to piggyback on what you were saying, we were talking about being on the front end of that wave.
So you're going to hear a thing about hiring waves and whatnot. And let me say this: having an airline career is very good, very, very good. But to really, really ensure yourself a great career, you really want to be on the front side of that hiring move. That puts the maximum amount of people junior to you, seniority counts at an airline. So when you have that, you get that insurance for the downtime, so that you're insulated from furloughs or whatnot. So if you're at the beginning of that hiring wave, you're gonna have a great career. I mean, that's really the difference between having a great career and a good career. Depending where on that hiring move. So you really want to look at that. So given that, you see down in 2006 and 2009, 2010, following that big dip in the airlines, there's always been a robust recovery. So as you've probably seen, the economy start to turn around. There's a little more confidence in the flying public. They're starting to fly more. Numbers are going up. So we're moving towards that boom time. So where are you to be prepared for that hiring boom? Ideally, we want to make sure that you're as best prepared to be in the front side of that boom. So it's a good place to be.
Yeah, so I think it's important to keep in mind that, the airline industry is a reflection of economies, and it's consistently, has historically always cycled. There are going to be upturns or downturns, there always have been. But what is important in terms of planning a career in the airline industry is, one, to be aware, like, this isn't unprecedented. It is a unique circumstance, just like 9/11 was a unique circumstance, and 2008 was a unique circumstance, but they all have commonalities in terms of the impact on the airline industry, the impact more specifically in some ways on the economy as well. And classically and historically, what you see in terms of return usually is driven by economy uptick. And so while it is important to, or fantastic, I should say rather, to be on the front end of a hiring wave, it's also important, if you need to do this airline thing like we need to do it, and that's why we're here, to understand and plan and account for a potential economic downturn in the future. So that informs a lot of decisions that a person might make in terms of where they do their training, where they pursue employment. And I think that it's from this important to understand that economic downturns, I won't call them normal, but they're normative, right? And to make decisions in terms of how you plan your career with that in mind and that potential implication in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good, let's move on.
Yeah, we're gonna switch gears here for, I think we'll talk a little bit more then about what, we know how we've reacted in the past. I think now the question is, how do we know that this will happen again in the future? What are some indicators, some leading indicators that kind of show us the recovery path for the future?
Well, airlines, again, this is the key. Airlines are in the business of making money. I mean, that's what they do. Airlines will not give away money freely without, a reason to do so. That being said, I mean, airlines are planning many years ahead with, many different plans. Since the beginning of this year, there have been some aircraft orders that have been canceled, most notably the Boeing MAX series aircraft. You can see that they've sustained a significant amount of cancellation orders, but you can still see the amount of aircraft that they still have on order. Same thing with the Airbus aircraft. They've actually seen an uptick because the 737's gone away, the 320, 321 NEOs are filling that void and people are buying them. Airlines have not canceled their orders. So they're still planning to have these aircraft come up and actually go into new markets. And, the airlines felt that this was going to be a long-term thing. They'd be canceling orders. So I think Warner Pacific is still taking orders this year.
Yeah, SkyWest, as an example, had some total of 51 aircraft that were scheduled on property this year. And throughout this downturn, SkyWest has been taking delivery of the aircraft throughout the year. Some of those deliveries have been backdated, pushed back in terms of deliveries, but the contracts remain. Aircraft delivery remains, and in cases like United, or SkyWest rather, versus places like United or some others, a little bit different in terms of fleet management approach, but Southwest is another example, has aircraft that with MAXes still on order and opportunities to, much of the way I think like SkyWest, in that opportunities to either utilize those aircraft for additional growth or use them for a more efficient fleet. And those who have that financial position, it's to take an opportunity, if you look at it that way, in a circumstance like we have right now, and capitalize on that position with those aircraft.
Absolutely. So those are the one of the things that you have to look at. Also, airlines are using this as an opportunity to streamline their fleets, get rid of the older fleets. Just by looking at the numbers with the airline orders and the fleet types that the Boeing and Airbus are delivering, they're going to take acceptance of those aircraft. And it's going to be an opportunity to save money, whether it be older aircraft maintenance, more fuel efficient, better passenger experience, things of that nature.
And we've spoken about flight path vectors, how airlines aren't going to profit unless they're growing.
Absolutely.
Right? And so their future plans are still to grow and to still take on aircraft deliveries, as witnessed by this chart here, 12,000 unfulfilled orders from Airbus and Boeing. So it's still in the airline's best interest to grow, still in the airline's best interest down the road to take these aircraft deliveries, which is going to mean continued pilot jobs.
Absolutely.
Slots.
So again, this is an indicator that even the airlines don't feel this would be a long-term bump in the road. We're even seeing some questions about 7 to 10 years we don't see anything. I don't believe that to be true. Airlines, again, with the background working with contracts with the airlines, they would not keep aircraft on orders for 7 to 10 years. They would release those contracts and use funds somewhere else. That's just the financials of it.
Well, even piggybacking on that a little bit, talking about one of the slides we saw previously, furloughs going out.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about this. What if a company like United Delta furloughs 2,000 pilots? And let's say they start bringing those pilots on next year sometime, or if they were to furlough 2,000. Roughly, we think it would take them about a year to bring back 1,000 pilots, right? And so that doesn't fit with the 7 to 10 year time frame that might have been mentioned earlier. If they would start bringing pilots back on, if they did furlough, hopefully they don't, but if they do, they'll bring them back on at a much quicker rate than it's forecast maybe 7 to 10 years out.
Absolutely.
One quick point too, with regard to that too, and furloughs. At this point in time, we hear furlough all the time, furlough. The airlines are furloughing, and to date, those are war notices that we see. We aren't seeing large furloughs. Now, there have been other companies that we've had, some smaller companies, probably generally when economies shrink, the airlines that are running thinner margins end up in some kind of cases expiring. But at this point in time, as far as furloughing, we're not seeing mass furloughs in the industry. I think that's an important point because I hear it all the time. Well, with the airlines furloughing, and I say, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. We will see, but the fact of the matter is right now, it's not happening. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind at this point in time.
And I think a target date to look to that would be October 1st.
Yeah.
October 1st, we'll see where we fall.
Sure.
Just for everybody else, and I don't know about experience for some of the folks that might be watching. So if you think of this number, 12,000 jets, is that a lot? Is that a little? Can you put a little bit of perspective? How many jets does a company like Southwest Airlines fly right now?
We're up to 800.
Yeah, just shy.
Maybe just around 800. Around 800.
Some maxes come back.
Yeah, about 800. But the bigger question is, most airlines run 5 crews per aircraft. So that's 10 pilots per aircraft. So if you're talking 12,000 pilots and 5 crews per aircraft, it is around. Some are a little leaner, some are a little richer. Just think of how many pilots that is.
Right. So 12,000 airplanes times 10 pilots each one, right? That's
120,000 pilots just for those aircraft.
And some of them could be replacing, as you said, older aircraft or something like this. But as you had alluded to before, it's not just about reducing costs by having more efficient aircraft. They also need to grow. So some of those orders will be to backfill plus add a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, the need to grow, I think, is something, in terms of those who are entertaining a career in the industry, it's known in the airline business, those that have been successful, that airlines can't shrink to profitability. Right. It's a model that doesn't work in the airlines. It has to do with cost per seat mile, amongst other things. And so when you understand that that's the way that the airlines work, it helps, I think, pilots make informed decisions about, where they potentially hitch their wagon to, as it were. Businesses or companies that understand that and build business models that reflect that truth. And it's funny that that's, I would say, a known idea, but I see companies, and we've seen historically all kinds of businesses for what is admittedly a difficult industry to be profitable in, but fall prey to the same problem, and that is they're not cognizant of that fact. And so it's one of the things that I talk about with people regularly and have over the years as a student in the industry. Listen, you need to understand how the airline business works so that as a pilot, you can make good decisions about where you pitch your piloting services for the stability that it is that we all want in our careers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
Excellent.
yeah. So we're going to get to your questions. So we're just going to go through these things and we're definitely going to get to your questions. So moving forward, there's a couple things that you've probably heard in the news. One is most airlines have offered early retirements and or extended voluntary leaves. So that's one aspect. So we're going to park that just over here for a second. But now the other one is the FAA has had a forecast of, at 65, we have to retire, whether we want to or not. So this is a forecast that's independent of the voluntary separations, as we call it, that took an early retirement. As you can see by these numbers, 2025 is going to be a historic year. That's going to be the most pilots reaching 65, if they make it that far, if they choose to go that far. What we've been seeing in our airline, Phil and I specifically, is we're finding a lot of pilots that are taking the early retirement are not even close to this 65. They're taking an early retirement, and in some cases, in the mid to late 50s. So this will actually compound these numbers that you're seeing in front of us as far as, these guys, these sets of pilots are reaching 65. Now there's a whole other group that have exited the industry. So for right now, it's a cost savings for the airlines. But at some point, when things start ramping up, well, it's going to compound this issue right now where these pilots are mandatorily leaving at 65, plus you had a group that actually left early. So what those numbers are, I don't know. We're going to have to see how things pan out, between now and the end of the year to see, what the impact of these early retirements is going to be. It's a good thing for right now for cost savings, but to have a understanding of how these numbers are going to change this graph, we will know at the end of the year.
And it could work, like I just spoke about here, to accelerate the hiring.
Absolutely.
And there's also, I think, other factors that go into this equation as well, like pilots leaving early for various reasons. Maybe losing a medical license, so they have to retire early, or maybe they're just an official to retire early. So that this really doesn't factor in those other small reasons.
So this is just assuming everyone's going to 65. No one's taking it early out. These are the actual numbers by carrier that are leaving the industry due to age.
So it's a best case scenario, right? Like it's a best case in terms of, or worst case, depending on how you look at that. But best case in terms of mandatory retirements. The only way that goes is that we see retirements beyond that or happen in a shorter time frame from that. But I think it's also important to make clear here what you guys are referring to. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with what early retirement options are happening in the industry right now. Maybe you sort of like to explain what that is.
Essentially, the airlines have offered pilots to take a lower monthly pay for a specified time, and they just leave the property until they reach 65 or that time expires. Typically, those salaries are less than what these pilots are getting paid. But again, in the macro, it's the cost savings of paying them a portion of their salary versus the full salary. There's a savings in that that's sort of significant. One more thing I want to talk about this graph is the only reason we actually put the major airlines in there is if the major airlines have pilots that are leaving, that creates vacuum, and they're going to get those pilots in the regionals. I'm just going to filter straight back down. There's a regional don't need pilots. It's going to filter down to, little big platform cargo, flight instructors, charter type things. So if you see that move in the majors, it's going to just have that trickle effect down to the regionals. So if you're thinking about getting into the airline industry, and you're thinking, well, there's not going to be a job beyond CFI, well, these are the years you're looking at to be like, well, these are the best chances you're going to have to find that job and to keep moving forward to that major.
So piggybacking off that, Do we want to talk about now if this is a good time to get in, or we have other?
Well,
At the time, I guess we got other slides. I'm sorry.
No, this is fun. I think, so this whole segment here is kind of, that's what we're training towards is getting into this concept of market timing, right? So you had talked a lot about how important it is to kind of get on the beginning of those waves, right? So I think what you're seeing in this information now is that the wave is probably coming no matter what, right? And it's a question of how quick can you get on the front end of that, right?
absolutely. So, you're gonna have to think of your career, if you're trying to think, is this a good time to get into an aviation career? Well, we're trying to give you some information, paint a picture here, that if that wave's coming, is coming in the future, you wanna be in the front of that wave, you need to go round about where that's gonna be, and then march back. Say, well, I need to be starting here to get into flight school, get my flight training, go through all the, get my hours, get into a regional, to kind of get on that wave right here. If you're gonna wait while that wave is there already, by the time you're gonna go through, we're gonna have information about this, that you're ready to move on there, you're gonna be significantly downstream from that beginning of the wave. And how long that wave will run, how robust will it be? Hopefully it'll be long enough for you to join it, but the idea is trying to think where that is and move backwards. So for those who are being flight instructors right now, this is not a bad time. I mean, right now is the time for you to build your resume, make yourself marketable, and do the best you can right now, because that wave, is coming fairly soon.
So there's a little bit of a lull right now.
A little lull right now, calm before the storm, if you will.
But we were also talking about potentially with recovery situations like this, how even regionals start back up quicker. And
They do.
And regionals stand to grow as well as major airlines on the recovery.
So how the business model works is there's partners that major airlines use to increase their network and marketing and whatnot, and then that's the regionals, if you will. And essentially, when things start turning around, before the major airlines will actually start throwing their fleet on there, it's easier to contract out to another carrier like SkyWest, where they can actually put an aircraft that's there that has less seats to kind of get those seats moving first. Once they see that market's actually moving and then there's more demand right there, they'll start pulling that back and sending their larger capacity aircraft there. But it's cheaper for the major airlines to utilize the regionals on the onset of moving forward than it is for them to start throwing their own aircraft there and flying them at 20% capacity. There's no profitability in that, whereas a 20 or 30% capacity on an ERJ, the economics are a little better.
So the CFI is very well could start to pick up jobs before.
Absolutely.
Pilots are regionals now are able to move on to majors before they're ready to start.
And again, what's telling about that is, Embraer orders, we didn't add that because that's typically the regional airline arena. Their business schedule and delivery schedule has not waned at all. SkyWest is still taking deliveries of aircraft.
It's exactly right. I think it's important to also understand in the industry, classically or historically, companies who are in a position to profit on the opportunities that exist in that are actually in the process of growing long before the rest of the industry. So there are a couple factors that you talked about that sort of play into that. If United, American, and Delta has pilots that end up on furlough, as the market turns around, they begin the recall process, and so they essentially build out their fleet again and build back the operation through the recalls. While that's happening, regional airlines classically don't have furloughs that get called back. It's much different than a major airline in terms of the numbers, statistically speaking. Those who are furloughed or let go, most of the times it's a little more dramatic in the regional airline business, in all honesty. That is, they usually don't survive. They don't usually furlough and then get called back. They furlough if they stay alive, and then the people don't come back. That's usually the way that works. So it means then, for those who are interested in the industry, when that process begins, they're looking for new hires. They're not recalling, which is part of the factor that moves the need or demand for new employees, new pilots at those airlines. In addition to that, in down markets, we have classically seen throughout economic downturns over and over again. Most recently, SkyWest Airlines nearly doubled, as an example or a data point, through the last economic down, 2008. So they were in a position in the turnaround to capitalize on the opportunities that naturally become existent when you have companies that go away, for example, and the capacity that was then being managed by those airlines is now up in the air, no pun intended. And so a company who has staffing and aircraft and money is able to capitalize on those, and that hiring process begins more quickly most of the time than in other places.
Absolutely.
Sure. So on kind of to that point, as far as getting into this industry, whether you're somewhere in the process now or whether you have no background at all, the next slide here will talk a little bit about kind of the timeline, right? This assumes you have no previous experience, right? You're looking either for a career change or you're just coming out of, let's say, high school or college, and you want to get into this career. The whole question of how do I get there, right? It's not necessarily as quick as getting a job in the IT world or something like this, right? There's a pretty lengthy process these days to be eligible for any airline job because of the regulations and how they are, right? And so I think it's important to understand this in respect to the timing side of things, right? So yeah, maybe airlines aren't hiring today, right? But if you're looking to get into this industry, you're not ready for them to hire today, right?
Right, and the funny thing about it is that airlines aren't hiring in mass today, but airlines are hiring today, right? So there are examples out there throughout all of this that have hired and continue to hire in a number of different places. So when you look at that, again, this isn't airline specific, but with business travel, for example, now that it's already back to pre-COVID levels, i.e. year over year, you're seeing a resurgence in air travel as we speak and demand, and there are airlines and types of operations that have grown. I mean, cargo operations, for example, has been, you have other airlines that are venturing out into cargo operations that have been filling those classes on them, right? So the hiring is for sure very much less than it was 8 months ago.
Absolutely. And that follows the same pattern as 2008, 2009 pattern. Absolutely. Well, most of the commercial passenger airlines, which were legacy and the major airlines, were not hiring, but they were still a few that were. And there are still some regionals that were, and some cargos that were.
Yeah. Hey, Boz, if you're getting into the industry, look at those graphs. 2025. I would really mark 2024, 2025 just on sheer numbers. Just a statistical number of how many pilots are leaving the industry. The void that's going to be there. And I will say, even going to the FAA, the historic amount of commercial airline pilot certificates that they are issuing is 30% less than 20 years ago. So,
Which you stand to gain.
which you stand to gain. So if you're looking at this graph in front of you, you're saying, well, I need some time to, get my financing, go to class, get my ratings, get my time in, and where will I be at that time? Kind of map where you're at right now, look at 2024, 2025, and work back from there.
So, kind of piggybacking off that, we were talking about this earlier, and looking at this chart, this graph that we have up, for you to get to the point, say you wanted to start flight school, say tomorrow, actually, you want to start flight school. Well, it takes a while to secure, if you don't have the financial means in place, even if you do, that takes a while. But let's say you don't have the financial means in place, that process, to go through the application process, to acquire the loans and the financial means to start flight school is 4 months, 4 maybe 5 months. And so once you start flight school, you're looking at probably the quickest between you getting your ratings and you building your hours to 1,500 hour minimum so you can get on with the regional airline. That footprint looks like 3 years. If it could be quickest,
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a few people maybe go a little bit quicker than that, but I mean, it really just depends on a lot of other variables. But I'd say 2 to 3 years for sure is the fastest you're probably going to see that thing happen. Right?
Yeah. So you could be up to 3.5 years between getting your financial loans in place, securing your financial ability to start flight school, and actually obtaining your ratings and then obtaining your hours. Could be 3 get over 3 years.
And it depends a lot on the paths that you're gonna take to get to the place to be eligible for those, the role that you want, right? If you're looking to get to a regional airline, for example, you first gotta figure out how long you get through training, right? So if I'm 18 and I decide, okay, well, I'm gonna go to a place like Embry-Riddle, or I'm gonna go do one of these degree programs, okay, great, but it's gonna take you 3 years to get those ratings done, right? So now that's 3 years just to get your ratings. Then you still need to get to ATP minimums, right? And so different opportunities, right? Are you gonna become a flight instructor? Are you gonna try to find banner towing or, whatever other kind of site survey, photography deal, kind of scrap for whatever you can get kind of deal, right? Are you doing full-time flight instruction? Are you doing this kind of on the side while you have a real job kind of thing, all these backgrounds are, when you talk to a bunch of guys, they all come from very different backgrounds. You'll find guys that went really fast through everything because they were hyper-focused and this is all they wanted to do. And then there's other guys that it might have taken them 5-6 years to get to a regional airline, right, to qualify for those jobs. So it really depends a lot on the path that you ultimately elect to take.
And so here we are, almost, in the fall of 2020. So you're looking at the end of 2023. If you're looking at like a 3-year market stage, right? And I think like we were talking about earlier, October 1st is going to be telling if there's a lot of furloughs, actual pilots getting furloughed, and then even towards the end of this year, 2020, maybe January 1st will also be telling. That's what 2021 is going to look like. But if you started right now to secure, like I said, the financial means.
Well, let's put one thing out there. There has been no slowdown in flight training. Okay, the slowdown is happening at the airlines. You reduce schedules. So if you're going to flight school, COVID has not reduced the amount of flights you can do. So you still are able to do a normal, training profile. COVID has not affected that at all. Okay, so yes, if you started training out and you wanted to hit it aggressively, that capacity in a flight school is absolutely there. So that still exists. So I just want to make sure a clear distinction between what we're talking about the airlines and we're talking about the flight training world. So this is still basically, if COVID still persisted, you still can train aggressively if you want. Okay?
Sure. Yeah, and once again, I think it's just a matter of, I think in a lot of cases we had questions specifically around maybe not so much the guy or gal coming right out of high school or college, but those that are maybe in their 30s and are looking to do a career change, like, should I give up the good job that I have now to go jump headfirst into this thing?
Well, there's been we had several questions about that, and unfortunately, those questions really hit home for me because that was me. I didn't start this airline until I retired from my previous career. So I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I didn't even get to the airlines until my mid 30s. Is it viable? Absolutely. Absolutely. But there's so many variables, where do you work, what do you do to get a kid, what's your financial responsibilities? Is there a way to do this? Absolutely. But, to talk about those specifically and give you, direct information that's going to help you
based off your specific
scenario, we can't really, go through that. Contact us about that. We'll sit down, we can go through it and give all the different possibilities.
Stuff to think about, stuff to consider so that you can make an educated decision for yourself.
We have one question: should I quit university to start doing this? If you're close to graduating in your 4-year degree, finish your degree. Okay, do not leave. You'll be so far ahead of your contemporaries once you do start flight training with your 4-year degree. So finish your degree.
Because at some point you are going to be finished.
You're going to finish at some marketable. Absolutely. So, so those questions that you have that are, a little further along, contact us directly, and we'll give you our time and our expertise.
Good. So we talked a little bit about this as well, and kind of just the rate of return that we should potentially see out of kind of the airline recovery side. So this is just right from the TSA that everybody kind of checks all the time. I think you see the news sometimes. And all that's changed here is just kind of a forecast based on the rate of return that we've seen so far. I think by the end of the year, assuming that we don't see a boom after the holidays, if we just saw the normal rate of return that we've experienced thus far, it comes back to
nearly 60% anyway by that point, right?
Yeah,
and there are examples.
One, yeah, will be almost all of it.
Right, and there are models right now, especially with our recent. So I mean, it's a moving target, right? So we had record screenings throughout since the beginning of this past week. And if you take, again, those numbers and you project those over a path and then last year's numbers without COVID, what you see is an intersection maybe at the end of this year. So I think the important thing is to understand that anybody who's sensible looks at our numbers, looks at the current returns, and understands that there's a range. A sensible person looks at the return of air travel in a sensible range. There is a model that would suggest by the end of this year, air travel could be back to pre-COVID levels. Is that the way it's going to work out? I don't know. Personally, I think maybe not, but possibly. I would put it maybe a little bit safely or conservatively past that. But again, who knows? I think the sensible thing is to understand that it's a fluid environment. There's going to be a process of return, and there are a number of factors that come to play. And it's possible for it to be back at what was pre this deal by the end of the year. On the other end of that scale of spectrum, we may see business travel, of course, as another example, be more lagging in returns. There's a survey of the largest 100 businesses with business travel and what their plans were with regard to return to travel. And most of those, the returns were pretty conservative as far as their game plan to return. And I think there's a lot of wait and see with regard to that. That's one factor that has a significant impact and influence on the return of air travel. What we, I think, have seen that is clear is that people are ready to go out, given that things are open, and do their entertainment travel. That we've seen, and that comes back very quickly, and has in surges. We see, okay, it's good, goes on the decline, people start coming back, oh no, it's a resurgence, okay, we'll travel a little bit. But then people, it seems like they sit crazy, like, you know what, we got to go. And we see this current trend here again, where travel and demand is trending up.
Just for us, I've been flying through this entire COVID pandemic, just seeing the passenger reaction. I see that the flight pilots get a little more confident in what's happening, and there's some safeguards in place. Things are being addressed. I see that the passenger behaviors are getting a lot more friendly.
Yeah.
Absolutely, more interaction. There's, it seems on a trend, looking from the beginning of this year to now, that the public is ready to fly.
Starting to come back.
So it's just going to the passenger terminals where before, the most people you would see would be airline employees, not passengers.
Yes.
Now it's, you're seeing restaurants are open, the terminals are actually being attended. It's getting better. It's markedly better than, and crews are remarkably telling, wow, it's getting busier, which is good.
This last weekend is the first time I had to make choices on we had a turn, and I had to make choices about where I was going to go to get coffee because the lines were too long at multiple places. One of the upswings or upticks of this process is it didn't take me any time to get my coffee. If there was a place I could get coffee, for example, was the other.
Well, Chick-fil-A's and they're long.
Right, exactly.
Long lines, so that's a good problem.
It's a good problem.
Yeah. All right, that's fair. So just for a little bit more perspective, I think the next slide is going to show a little bit different perspective on that, and it's going to focus specifically on China. So this is about the domestic passenger travel in China. So one thing, just real quick to compare, it's not an exact comparison. The previous slide that was specific to us here in the United States is total all of our travel, right? Yeah. This is specific to just domestic travel, because the international piece, I think, is going to be a huge piece that might be missing out for a pretty long period of time.
It's a different part of the equation.
And that's a different part of the equation. When we're talking about the passenger demand piece, it's a different piece. So in China, as you see here, we're almost there as of now, right? Like at this point, we're at almost 90%. In China, they're like 90% of the capacity that they were before COVID domestically.
And we were discussing that China's about 4 months ahead of.
Right, because they experienced it back in like October, right?
Yeah, so they're about 4 months ahead of the curve what the United States is. Is that so?
Response has been response time,
Yeah.
reaction time, and all that stuff.
So anyway, I think obviously just the rest of the world is kind of a little bit ahead of us in this case, and so we can use them as kind of the benchmark to know that if we can continue to stay on target, I think we'll eventually get back to the exact same place, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good. All right, so I think the next little bit is switching gears outside of that stuff and more to some questions that we had regarding maybe choosing where to go in your career. Right now, there's talk of, and we've had hiring still from places like FedEx, right, or Atlas, or Southern, or Primera, right, these kinds of companies, because all of this cargo stuff has really taken off in light of the whole COVID deal.
Sure.
So is it safer to go that route than it is to go the passenger airline route? And so, I don't know, I think your guys' insight into this, being, talking to airline pilots as you guys have continued to hold lines throughout this whole time, what are your thoughts on that?
I think in this specific circumstance, they've thrived, right? The cargo airlines, they probably continue to hire, they continue to grow. I've spoken to a buddy of mine at ATI, but we all know people at FedEx and UPS, and they're doing fine in this specific circumstance. I think, though, that they are susceptible to threats to their stability in different circumstances. For example, we were talking about just last year how I think FedEx lost the contract with Amazon. And so that went to other airlines, and that hurt FedEx for a while. They stopped hiring for, portion of 6 months to a year. So, I mean, it's kind of depends, I think, depends on what your priorities, your personal priorities are, because at any particular airline, at any, whether it be cargo or passenger, they have the potential to be just incredible and great career. And so you need to find the one, I think, that's a good fit for you and prioritize, make your own priorities, your decision based on what's number one on your priorities.
And so I think it's important to understand that, is it a safer airline career path is the question. And I don't think that there's much in the way of question that it's a stable career or airline path. And what we've only seen throughout this process is the increase in terms of demand. That's been emerging in the Amazon era, as I'll refer to it, if that's appropriate or not. I think, however, for pilots, what's maybe more important to consider is a little bit of what I think you were speaking to, and that is cargo flying is a very different lifestyle and operation from passenger airline lifestyle. And it has very strong implications on lifestyle and a lot of things. And I think that part of the equation needs to begin with those pieces, while stability needs to be a part of the matrix and consideration. I think that those things need to be explored. I would in no way, shape, or form encourage people, you know what, cargo is just more stable, go after that, don't pursue passenger airline. Because there are a whole lot of other factors that are in play. And historically speaking, there are airline paths that have been as stable or more stable than cargo paths as well. And so when you look at airlines in the business that have never furloughed pilots in the past, in passenger service, you go, well, there's definitely some examples of folks who have been in business for 49 years, for example, and not furloughed a pilot to date, right? And in passenger service. So, good question to ask. I think there are a lot of other factors that need to be considered as a person, included with that, that a person needs to take into account, say that I don't know what path I want to take.
Yeah, so I think for me at least, that takeaway is more along the lines of maybe not the type of deal that you're going to do, but maybe look at the companies specifically that you're going to spend your career with, right? So the focus should be on the entity that you're going to saddle up with as you move, right?
Yeah. Financial path and track record, company ethics and how they do business, and all of those things.
There's a lot of factors that go into that decision.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And then I think the last kind of portion of questions that we tended to get quite a bit of inquiries about was just around the kind of how do we do things now in the current COVID world, right? And so what are kind of the effects of this? And I think we can talk a little bit about that from both the standpoint of how things have changed maybe at the airlines, how things have changed with us in the flight training sector, and then how any other pieces that have been affected.
I think that with the measures that the airlines, our airlines specifically, forward and put a promise to our customers, they're feeling more comfortable. They're actually coming out and flying. Yes, we're wearing masks. There's a requirement that we'll be wearing masks. Aircraft are cleaned every flight. They're sterilized, sanitized every single flight. Some of the other, downturns. Well, the turn time between flights is a little bit longer. Boarding is taking a little bit longer because you can't have a bunch of people in the jet anymore. They're just staying in smaller groups at a time. But for the most part, I think the airlines and the airline employees, crew members, flight attendants, and pilots are assimilating it seamlessly, and it shows, and the passengers are actually coming back. So.
And I don't think, speaking of longer turn times and cleaning the plane between every day, I don't think we've seen any significant rise in delays or anything like that.
No.
I think we're still running a pretty tight ship on time operation.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other piece of it that people, some of that information is out there, but I frequently run into misnomers with regard to the safety of air travel, and the safety in particular with regard to air filtration. There's what people have had a misunderstanding of is that the air and air management in aircraft, for example, is better than any building anybody is pretty much ever in. So when you understand that the entire volume of air in an airplane is turned over on the average aircraft in 2 to 3 minutes, you couldn't ask for a better management environment in what we normatively experience than what you get on an aircraft. And I think for those who are returning to travel, and some understand that, have gotten that, there's a little bit of information that I've seen trickling out with regard to that most, the lay person, as it were, doesn't know. When you couple that with, electrostatic sanitization that's happening between each leg, it's a ridiculous environment, in a public environment that is, in terms of cleanliness, one that arguably is not recreated to save places like hospitals. That's the closest thing that you get out there outside of that. So when you realize that, you go, well, goodness.
Yeah. Just to add on that, just to really clarify that volume of air in the aircraft is dumped overboard. It's not recycled and pumped back into the aircraft. That is dumped overboard, and it's getting new air from the outside ambient air, pressurizing it, and the air you're getting in has not been breathed by anybody else. I don't think you're able to breathe that air at 36,000 feet. So it's ground in the air for 36,000 feet. Pumping that air in there, and in 2-3 minutes, that whole thing's cycled up and dumped out.
And running through filters as well.
And it's running through filters through the entire thing. So it's not recycling the same volume of air. It's dumping that out, and then it's getting new air from the engines. This is small little systems explanation of what it is. So I hear that a lot. No, it's not recycling air. Right. Okay.
And on the flight training side, our airplanes are really small in comparison. So sterilization is really just between the student and the instructor to just wipe out the stuff they're using in the cockpit, and there is nobody in the back waiting, right? So not a whole lot else to do, but between each flight, it's different flight schools might do it a little bit differently. We have a lot of mandatory processes and procedures. We got to wear masks even on board the aircraft. Both pilots will be wearing masks. We do temperature scans before every flight gets launched. Both pilots need to do temperature reading, and then cleaning planes and the whole deal. And I'm sure most flight schools are probably doing something along similar lines to this. I'm sure the airlines have something similar as well. If any of our employees or students are either test positive, or if they were to ever be exposed to anybody that was positive, we have a whole quarantine process where they have to leave for their 2 weeks, right? Or they have to come back with their negative tests in order to be able to be reinstated as either a student or an instructor, right? And so I'm sure the airlines do basically the exact same thing.
I think it's a little more stringent. I have not seen any crew members that have been sick,
Right.
or been removed or anything like that. So I think people are listening to, if you're not feeling so well, stay home. Those are all kind of lines. I have not flown with anyone that's that's happened to them as well.
Right.
So,
And if we're exposed at our airline, we've got a mandatory 14-day quarantine.
Yeah.
Mandatory off for 2 weeks, 14 days, and I think get tested and then
Yeah.
get that negative test back.
That's how ours works as well.
Daily assessments, temperature checks for us, they're mandatory submitted on, so yeah, absolutely.
So I think that piece is pretty similar. The other interesting piece, as far as at least on the flight training side, we talked a little bit about securing funding and this kind of deal. And it's kind of interesting now is one of the opportunities that's kind of weird in the sense that you have some of the best interest rates you're probably ever going to get on a loan, right? And so
Absolutely.
if I still have my student loan, for example, now's the time where I'm going to go try to refinance it, right?
Yes.
And if you're going to get into flight training right now, you're going to accrue the least amount of interest during your time training.
Money is cheap right now.
Money's cheap.
Money's cheap.
So that might be, if you want to think about it right now, look into the financial. I mean, that is a significant portion of the decision-making tree to start doing now. I would say yes, but
Right.
Yeah.
rates are low. Rates are low.
It's definitely going to be an opportunity to get in. And once again, regardless of which stage, even if you're already at the airlines and you're still repaying your loans, well, you should probably go check in with SoFi or whoever and try to get it refinanced, right? Because that's an opportunity to get a whole bunch of money taken off for the next X number of years.
Or go get a nice house and a nice garage.
Or do that instead, whatever.
It's a good time for anything.
We're gonna have a great South.
All right, moving on.
Yeah, excellent. So I think that kind of surmises everything that was asked as people were registering for the event before. So Brittany, do you have live questions that people have started asking now? Oh my, that's a lot of them. Okay, well, I don't know if we're gonna have time to get to all of them, but we'll definitely try to get through some of these right now.
Wow.
All right.
We'll do a shotgun series with these, right?
We just trying to blaze through.
Some of you kind of already answered a little bit, but.
Okay. So for those not interested in flying for a major airline, what other options might be available? So charter, tourist, photography flights, etc. What are some of the pros and cons to consider in these areas?
I flew with a great guy who was a corporate pilot for 20-something years. He said he flew everything from Learjet to Gulfstream 550s, the G5. He had great career. He flew some very huge flight departments. And I flew with him, I said, how was it? He goes, I had a great career doing flying corporate. I said, but every agency I work for have one thing in common. They're all out of business. So he was looking for more stability. He loved the global travel. He loved flying VIPs. He had numerous stories, one day I'll be in Barcelona, the next day I'm in Greece. So that schedule really appealed to him, but he was looking for the stability. So knowing yourself of what your tolerance level is, it would be the first step. And then looking at corporate flying internationally is great. I have a friend who's flying right now in Dubai, and he's flying the Gulfstream 550 for an oil company. And there's those possibilities as well.
What might be a good fit now, I think a takeaway from that, what might be a good fit now, maybe as a younger pilot, might not necessarily be a good fit for you later once you maybe
Have kids
if
or
you want
whatnot.
family, if you want the stability or the
If you want to live abroad.
standardized schedule, right?
So my friend loves living in Dubai, so he
Yeah.
likes living there. So.
But there's certainly a lot of different options besides just passenger flying.
Yeah, so if you're going to look into flying something else, if you're a flight instructor right now, start building your network of connections.
Yes.
The corporate world is all about connections. So it's a very tight-knit group. And
As well as aviation, as well as the passenger.
absolutely.
Connections, that's one thing I wanted to mention earlier. We didn't really get that, but networking and connections, starting from day one when you're a CFI, or not CFI, but when you're training and when you're CFI, networking connections are very important.
Yeah, I would just say that there are a number of different paths out there, and so we've talked a little bit about passenger airlines versus cargo, for example, and to that point, two very different, generally speaking, two very different career paths. Sometimes they can coalesce, but and converge. Sometimes, again, they converge. But primarily, a person should probably become familiar with them. Corporate flying, as we've talked about, you know, the old saying goes, plan on reevaluating your employment every 5 years. And so, you know, if that's a lifestyle that you're comfortable with, because of, for example, the average corporate pilot works a significantly less or smaller schedule than, you know, an airline employee does, or an airline pilot. And so, when you look at that coupled with your first years in corporate flying, generally a person on average historically makes more than they would in a comparable or comparable airline path. But in the top end of the scale, you can make more in the airline industry, generally speaking. These are general rules. And so there's a whole bunch of different factors. Business travel right now, the thing about it is that we talk about the airline business as being sort of a black hole. It sucks everything else into it. So as far as pilot resources, what that means is that there are opportunities. If there are opportunities in the airlines, there are likely opportunities as an instructor, as a corporate pilot, as a cargo pilot, because airlines have a tendency to suck everything else into it, generally speaking. Right now, business travel, as I may have mentioned already, has returned. It's recovered. In fact, it's beyond 2019 year-over-year levels. So there's opportunity as it stands right now in that industry. But as always, those jobs are very much about connections, historically speaking. One,
And they're smaller operators, right?
They're
Like
smaller
compared to the
operators.
airline operations, right? They're not as large. So the demand for pilots is generally then just by the nature of that going to be lower, and that's why the networking piece is so important.
yeah, the nature of the group and the way that they do business is much more personal.
And just to add, if we're not answering your questions fully, contact us.
And I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of these questions.
So we go next one.
Yeah, so they had a question about the average salary you will start with at a regional airline.
50,000. Right? 45.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's fair.
Without bonuses,
Right.
just
Without working extra.
like, some of the factors in that is, pre-COVID, there might have been sign-on bonuses.
Yeah.
And I think we were just talking about this yesterday. Is these regional airlines, once their hiring departments come back, I think it's going to be totally different as far as maybe what they're looking for, what they're offering. So the
Tuition reimbursement, maybe.
Yeah, tuition reimbursement may be gone, sign-on bonuses may be gone, just to sign where they're at. But I think as the demand comes back up for pilots, definitely over the years, those potentially could come back as bonuses. But for right now, you got to look at basically the base pay.
Based on 50.
I don't think we anticipate them cutting, necessarily.
Yeah,
Because it's kind of a standard of living.
Well, right. So, I mean, to that end and that point, this question comes up as well. Do airlines hire proactively or do they hire on a need basis? And historically speaking, airlines hire after they need.
Right.
That's what they were. It's very much reactive,
They're not
classic.
Right.
Not in any way, shape, or form proactive because, as Ali already said, they're in the business of making money. And in the airline business, things are, generally speaking, for most companies, quite tight. So, one, I would say, I put that in that 40 to 50 is kind of has been the average target in terms of starting in the regional airline business. Yeah, bonuses and those incentives they're not there now. However, as soon as demand returns, it's always about having to fill seats. And those things, just like any time in the past, if the demand is there, as it appears it will be, and it's inevitably going to be again, those things will return as demand returns.
And if it makes you feel any better, when we started with the regionals, 20,000.
I'm not even All right, next question.
So there was a question from somebody coming right out of high school. So they're asking, should I go to college first and then do flight training, or should I do the opposite? Should I go to flight training and then achieve an online degree as I'm moving forward in the career?
Well, flight training, you're going to get credit for your ratings. So would you rather be sitting in a classroom getting your credits or sitting in an airplane getting your credits?
There's a number of different ways to go about that, and dependent the individual's abilities and their circumstance. Financing is one of those things that comes out there. the paths classically and historically, you can state that, of course, obviously for a person who does a degree path are different a lot of times than what they are for an individual who comes out. And if they, don't have financial means of their own, acquiring renting for just flight training, well, that could be a more challenging deal if they don't have other people to sort of back them up. They also have to consider the fact that they've got an age requirement. And so in that circumstance, until you're eligible for the ATP, it doesn't really matter because you can't go to work in the airline industry if that's your goal.
Right.
And so in some cases, a degree track, while they do flight training in one of those, makes great sense. On the flip side of that, some people don't want to do any more school than that's why they're pilots, because we like to look outside of windows, not sit in classrooms, right? Yeah, exactly. And so for them, they're going to go and get as much credit as they possibly can by having those ratings, and then clap out essentially, or get credit for that in terms of hours at a university that they don't have to sit in a classroom.
Right.
And so for me, when I talk to folks, it's largely again about their circumstance. Where are you at in life, and how does that fit for you? And for a lot of people, it means, maybe in a later stage of life, go and get that rating and ratings, I should say, so you can go to work and continue, pay for your own bills, and then acquire that degree in one of the online or nights and weekends path while you're working and building flight experience, so that as soon as you hit that magical time, you're eligible for a job in the airline.
Well, not to go too deep down this hole, because to compound that even more, we've spoken about how certain airlines want you to have a 4-year degree from a brick and mortar school where you actually physically attend the school.
No online courses.
No online courses.
And in a timeline as well.
Yes.
That degree was accomplished in a particular 4 years or 5 at the most.
And not 10.
Right.
Yeah.
And so,
Good. So, a lot of questions about degree stuff, it seems. I'm trying to see if we can hit some other areas. So there's,
We had a couple more come through as well, so.
okay, so a lot of this is.
Just as you go over, just understand a couple of things. Yes, you will need a degree to be competitive to get to the major airlines. To get to a regional, it's not necessarily a required thing. It looks a lot better, it's great, not a required thing. I would say that the common pathway, we find a lot of students who are going to get their ratings, get to a regional airline, and then start doing their degree. And you'll find there's a lot of people at the regional airlines, utilizing various institutions, getting their degree while they're at a regional airline. They're doing their homework on their overnights, whatever else. You're going to be afforded a lot of time at the regionals to actually complete that. The downside is, depending how diligent you are at the regionals, that the people who are coming into this industry with a 4-year degree already do not have that burden. So they can actually have more time to fly, do other opportunities at the airlines where, a lot of other people just do their degree.
So we'll do one more question, and then everybody else who has asked questions, we'll make sure to have all your contact information saved, and we can reach out either if it's about AeroGuard's program specifically, we'll get back in touch with you. If it's something more about the industry, then certainly we'll pass your information along to flight path vectors, and they can reach out as well. And so one last question that was, I think, kind of interesting, a little bit off of the topic a little bit, but it's kind of about that fear about getting into the industry. So this individual really wants to get into flying, but they have, they suffer from some kind of motion sickness. Is this something that a lot of pilots have, and how do they overcome it if they do?
Well, the first thing is you're going to have to get a medical. That's the first thing. You have to be found medically fit that there's no underlying reason for the nausea or the motion sickness. So there's that. Barring that, as I was a pipeline instructor for many, many years, I did find some of my students did have some problem with nausea. Most of them, it was nerves, but once they started understanding how things work, they're getting more comfortable, the nausea actually went away.
Or if they're controlled.
When they're in control, they control the aircraft. And they're like, oh, okay, so they moved past that. So I've only had one student that I can recollect right now that could not overcome the nausea, and they had to stop.
And I would say, for me, personally, if I haven't been flying for a while or doing maneuvers for a while, it's like upset recovery, for example, some instructions to do. Going out and doing one of those can't give me a little queasy, but that's one of the things that I personally face. For me, it was actually just going out and flying. So I feel a little uncomfortable, then I get back into it, and then that's all gone.
Yeah, don't worry, when you get to the simulators, you'll get nauseated.
They still, everybody just
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
came
yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just came back.
That's pretty normal.
Exactly.
So-
First time you want to do this.
Yeah, the motion, the simulator, yeah,
It's on.
Anyway,
But yeah, I think, once again, I think we're pretty much capped out on time when we get after our okay. So, we will certainly answer any of these other questions, individually for each and every person. I think we would like, to hopefully continue to do this, so, for sure, if you're still on now and you want to see us do this on a more monthly recurring basis, feel free to leave us a comment or ask us a question or reach out to Flight Path Vectors or AeroGuard and let us know, because I think continuing to do this, especially as we hit some of these benchmarks in October and in the beginning of the year and this kind of thing, it'll be important to kind of revisit where we're at and discuss kind of the state of the industry and see what we predict will happen then.
absolutely, absolutely. So it's a moving target. It's really, really dynamic. But the end result is this is a bad time to get into the airline industry. I would say this is a great time to get into the industry. If you guys into the flight training world within the past year, you're on track to kind of move forward and reap the benefits of your timing.
Yeah.
So,
and it's going to vary depending on the specific circumstances as well,
Yeah.
like we alluded to earlier, we discussed earlier. So reach out to us if you'd love to hear your story and where you're at, what you're thinking, and try and give you as much information to help you make that decision. So you can make, because obviously you're going to make the decision on whether or not this is the right time or the right career change for you. But we'd love to provide you with as much information as we can to make an educated decision.
And how can they do that too? So, Flight Path Vectors in terms of reaching out and some social
Yeah,
media.
so social media, Facebook, Flight Path Vectors, you can join our group, Instagram, same thing, Flight Path Vectors, or you can email us at flightpathvectors@gmail.com.
absolutely.
Fantastic. FlyAeroGuard.com is where you can get more information about our various training programs and also connect with our team here to learn more about getting financial aid stuff and all of that. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Eric.
And thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it.
It shows that you're intentional about your career. We appreciate that.
Yeah, look forward to meeting you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Bye.